I am the punishment of God. That is the warning Genghis Khan gave to the citizens of Bukhara before he burned their city to ash. We often think of history as a dry collection of dates, treaties, and maps. But the true story of our world is built on the backs of individuals, men who possessed a will so terrifyingly strong that they bent the entire world to match their vision. We are not talking about ordinary kings who inherited a crown. We are talking about the outliers, the men who started as slaves, outcasts, and hostages, yet rose to become the architects of human civilization and its destruction. Today, we are ranking the 7 strongest rulers in human history. We will dissect their tactical brilliance, their crushing cruelty, and the strange, often pathetic ways they met their end. From the jungles of Africa to the frozen steppes of Mongolia, this is the hierarchy of absolute power. Number 7. Shaka Zulu. At number 7, we find the man who turned a small, forgotten tribe into a military machine that would one day shake the foundations of the British Empire. Shaka Zulu. Shaka's story is one of rejection. Born around 1787, his conception was a mistake, an illicit affair between a chieftain and a woman named Nandi. The tribal elders refused to believe she was pregnant, claiming her swollen stomach was just a symptom of an intestinal beetle known as the Shaka. When the boy was born, that became his name, the Beetle. He grew up fatherless and bullied. Other children would beat him and force him to hold boiling porridge in his hands. But this torture didn't break him. It calloused him. When Shaka seized power, he didn't just lead. He forced his men to march 50 miles a day barefoot over thorns to toughen their feet. He invented the buffalo horns formation, trapping enemies in a ring of death. In just 10 years, he expanded the Zulu kingdom from 100 square miles to over 11,000. But absolute power breeds absolute paranoia. Shaka's psychological anchor was his mother, Nandi. When she died of dysentery in 1827, Shaka lost his mind. In his grief, he commanded that the entire nation suffer with him. He executed 7,000 of his own subjects for not grieving enough. He outlawed the planting of crops and the use of milk. He ordered that all pregnant women and their husbands be killed. His people could take no more. On September 22, 1828, his half-brothers approached him while he was sitting in his kraal. They stabbed him repeatedly. The man who built the Zulu nation was left to rot in an empty grain pit, his grave unmarked to this day. Number 5. The outsider who hijacked a revolution. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born in Corsica, an island that had only just become French. He grew up hating France. He was short, scrawny, and spoke with a thick peasant accent that invited mockery from his wealthy classmates at the military academy. He was a loner who spent his lunch breaks reading about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, dreaming of glory. But the French Revolution changed everything. The chaos allowed a talented artillery officer to rise quickly. He proved his genius at the siege of Toulon and later in Italy, where he won battles against armies twice his size. He moved so fast the enemy didn't know where he was. He famously said, "I may lose a battle, but I will never lose a minute." By 1804, he had declared himself emperor, famously taking the crown from the Pope's hands and placing it on his own head. He didn't just conquer, he reorganized. He created the Napoleonic Code, which is still the basis of law in many countries today. At the Battle of Austerlitz, his masterpiece, he baited the Russian and Austrian emperors into a trap on a frozen lake, crushing them. For a decade, he was the master of Europe. His ambition was his undoing. In 1812, he invaded Russia with 600,000 men. The Russians simply retreated, burning their own villages and crops. When Napoleon reached Moscow, it was empty and in flames. He was forced to retreat in the dead of winter. He returned to France with only 10,000 men fit for duty. He was exiled to Elba, but he escaped. In one of history's most cinematic moments, the French king sent the 5th Regiment to arrest him. Napoleon walked out alone to meet the 1,000 rifles pointed at his chest. He opened his coat and shouted, "If there is any man here who would kill his emperor, here I am." The soldiers dropped their weapons and wept, shouting, "Long live the emperor." He ruled for 100 more days before his final defeat at Waterloo. This time, the British locked him away on St. Helena, a lonely rock in the South Atlantic. He died there at age 51, likely of stomach cancer. Number 4. Julius Caesar. Number 4. The man whose name became the title for emperor in languages across the world. Julius Caesar. Caesar was born into a noble family that had lost its wealth. He knew that in Rome, money was power, and military glory was the quickest way to get money. He was a charming, dangerous operator. We've mentioned his kidnapping by pirates, how he joked with them while he was their prisoner, only to return and crucify them all. That wasn't just cruelty, it was marketing. It showed Rome that Caesar always kept his word. He went nearly bankrupt, bribing the people of Rome for their love. To pay his debts, he needed a war. He invaded Gaul. Over 8 years, he killed 1 million Gauls and enslaved another million. He wrote his own war diaries, sending them back to Rome like a serial novel, so the people wouldn't forget him. The Senate grew fearful. They ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome. Caesar knew if he returned without his soldiers, he would be arrested. So, on January 10th, 49 BC, he stood at the banks of the Rubicon River. He famously said, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. He crossed the river, sparking a civil war. He won. He chased his rival Pompey to Egypt, where he met Cleopatra, forming history's most famous power couple. He returned to Rome as Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. He forgave his enemies, welcoming them back into the Senate to show his mercy. This was his fatal mistake. On March 15, 44 BC, Caesar walked into a Senate meeting. He sat in his golden chair. The conspirators gathered around him. Suddenly, Casca struck him in the neck. Caesar tried to fight back, but he was surrounded by 60 men. He saw Marcus Brutus, a man whose life Caesar had saved, holding a dagger. Caesar stopped fighting. He pulled his toga over his head and collapsed. He died at the foot of the statue of Pompey, his old enemy. He had conquered the world, but he couldn't survive the politics of his own city. Number 3. Qin Shi Huang. Number 3. The man who burned history to write his own. Qin Shi Huang. Before him, China did not exist. There were only the warring states, 7 kingdoms locked in 200 years of bloodshed. Qin Shi Huang was the king of the Qin state. He was a cold, calculating sociopath who viewed human lives as building materials. Through brilliant strategy and ruthless warfare, he conquered all 6 rival states. In 221 BC, he declared himself the first emperor. He didn't want to just rule the land. He wanted to rule the culture. He standardized weights, measures, and the written language. But he also wanted to control thought. He ordered the burning of books, destroying history texts and poetry that praised the past. When scholars objected to his rule, he had 460 of them buried alive. He was a builder of impossible things. He connected existing walls to create the first version of the Great Wall of China, a project that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. It was said that the bones of the workers were ground up and used as mortar in the stones. But the emperor had a weakness. He was terrified of death. He survived 3 assassination attempts, including one where a blind musician tried to bludgeon him with a lead-filled lute. Paranoia consumed him. He slept in a different palace every night, so no one would know where he was. He sent a fleet of ships with 3,000 virgins into the eastern seas to find the legendary island of the immortals. They never returned, likely settling in Japan to avoid his wrath. In the end, his alchemists gave him immortality pills made of mercury. The heavy metal poisoned his mind and body. He died at 49 while on a tour of his empire. To hide his death until they returned to the capital, his ministers put his rotting body in a carriage filled with salted fish to mask the smell. He was buried in a tomb guarded by 8,000 terracotta soldiers, an army to rule in the afterlife. Number 2. Alexander the Great. Number 2. The standard by which all other generals are measured. Alexander the Great. Alexander was bred for war. His father, King Philip of Macedonia, created the phalanx, a wall of spears that could crush any enemy. But Alexander had something his father didn't: a divine complex. He slept with a copy of Homer's Iliad and a dagger under his pillow. He believed he was the descendant of Hercules and Achilles. When his father was assassinated, Alexander took the throne at age 20. He immediately launched a war against the massive Persian Empire. At the Battle of Gaugamela, he was outnumbered at least 2-1. But Alexander didn't wait. He charged his cavalry directly into the heart of the Persian line, aiming straight for the king of Persia. The king fled, and the empire crumbled. Alexander didn't know how to stop. He pushed east, through modern-day Afghanistan and into India. He founded over 20 cities, most of them named Alexandria. He adopted Persian customs, forcing his tough Macedonian generals to bow to him, which caused massive resentment. In a drunken rage, he even killed Cletus the Black, the man who had saved his life in battle, running him through with a spear. Alexander wept for days afterward, but the message was clear. He was becoming a tyrant. By the time they reached the Hyphasis River in India, his men had been marching for 8 years. They were covered in scars, rich with loot, and tired. They refused to go further. Alexander sulked in his tent for 3 days like a child, but eventually turned back. He made it back to Babylon, planning an invasion of Arabia. But after a night of heavy drinking, he fell ill. Paralyzed and unable to speak, he died at 32. His empire was immediately torn apart by his generals, who fought over the scraps of the world he had conquered. Number 1. Genghis Khan. And finally, number 1. The man who conquered more land than Alexander, Napoleon, and Hitler combined. Genghis Khan. His story is the ultimate underdog tale. Born Temujin, in the harsh plains of Mongolia, he was born clutching a blood clot, a prophecy of war. When he was 9, his father was poisoned by Tatars. The clan abandoned the family. Temujin grew up hunting rats and fighting wild dogs for food. He was captured by rival tribes, enslaved and locked in a wooden collar, but he possessed a magnetic charisma. He escaped, gathered a small band of followers, and began a systematic conquest of the steppe. He broke the old tribal loyalties. In his army, you were promoted based on ability, not birth. By 1206, he had united the Mongols and was named Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The Mongol army was unstoppable. They could ride for days without stopping, drinking the blood of their horses to survive. They used composite bows that could shoot 500 meters. But their greatest weapon was terror. When the governor of Otrar killed Genghis's trade envoys, Genghis didn't just invade. He erased the civilization. He diverted a river to wash away the birthplace of the governor. At the city of Nishapur, after his son-in-law was killed, his daughter asked that every person be killed. The Mongols slaughtered an estimated 1.7 million people in that city alone, making pyramids out of their skulls. Genghis Khan created the modern world. He established the first international postal system, established diplomatic immunity, and allowed religious freedom. He connected East and West, allowing goods and plague to travel the Silk Road. In 1227, during a campaign against the Xia, he died. The cause is unknown. Perhaps a fall from a horse, perhaps illness. But his final order was secrecy. His funeral procession carried his body back to the holy mountain. To ensure no one would disturb him, the soldiers killed every person and animal they passed on the journey. After he was buried, they rode 1,000 horses over the ground to flatten it. Then, they diverted a river to flow over the site. To this day, despite modern technology, the grave of the man who conquered the world has never been found. From the grain pit of Shaka Zulu to the hidden tomb of Genghis Khan. These 7 men proved that a single human will can reshape the geography of the earth. But they also proved that no matter how much you conquer, in the end, death conquers you. Which of these rulers do you respect the most? And who was simply a monster? Let me know in the comments below. For more deep dives into the dark corners of history, make sure you are subscribed.